philosophy is that by exposing the different assumptions of others, their philosophical sediment, if you will, our own assumptions come to the fore. Yet, for all the varied and rich philosophical traditions across the world, the Western philosophy I have studied for over 30 years, based entirely on canonical Western texts, is presented as the universal philosophy, the ultimate inquiry into human understanding. Comparative philosophy, study in two or more philosophical traditions, is left almost entirely to people working in anthropology or cultural studies. This abdication of interest assumes that comparative philosophy might help us to understand the intellectual cultures of India, China, or the Muslim world, but not the human condition. In fact, Western philosophy is so parochial that it is balkanized. When I lived in Manchester, I attended senior philosophy seminars at both its universities, in buildings on opposite sides of the same street, no more than half a mile apart. Because one department focused on continental European philosophy and the other on Anglophone philosophy, I was almost the only one to cross the road between the two, even though both claim a common ancestry through Descartes and Spinoza back to the ancient Greeks. This has become something of an embarrassment for me. Until a few years ago, I knew virtually nothing about anything other than Western philosophy, a tradition that stretches from the ancient Greeks to the great universities of Europe and America. Look at my PhD certificate or the names of the university departments where I studied, however, and there is only one unqualified word: philosophy. Recently, and belatedly, I have been exploring the great classical philosophies of the rest of the world, travelling across continents to encounter them firsthand. It has been the most rewarding intellectual journey of my life. I have discovered that to understand a culture's philosophical tradition better is to understand that culture better. To borrow an analogy from the Zimbabwean philosopher Joram Tuilasarira, understanding the philosophical framework of a people is like understanding the software their minds work on. If you don't know their software, there will always be this gap in terms of understanding in conversation. Such gaps explain why, for example, so many development aid projects in Africa have failed. If you want that aid to be of effect, then you have to engage with the people. If you want sustainability, you have to engage with the people. But many a time we have had white elephant projects basically because the people bringing them have no understanding of the philosophy and religion of the people. The software analogy is neat, but the relationship between classical philosophical texts and the folk philosophy of a people is clearly not a simple one. Ideas that are developed and analysed in depth by scholars do have their counterparts in the general culture, but in simpler, vaguer, broader forms. Most Americans and Europeans, for example, assert the value of individual freedom and liberty without any deep knowledge of how these concepts have been justified and explained by their philosophers. Millions of Indians live their lives according to principles of karma without an in-depth knowledge of the rich and complex literature articulating what precisely this involves. Ordinary Chinese assert the importance of harmony with little more than a cursory knowledge of the Confucian and Taoist texts that analyse and describe it. There is, nonetheless, a relationship between high scholarship and everyday living, which is why harmony, freedom, and karma play very different roles in different parts of the world. Even if we take the most sceptical view possible, that the folk versions of these philosophical ideas are diluted and bastardized beyond recognition, it is still important to understand how these concepts create the rhetorical space in which cultures think, explain, and justify. When an American politician speaks in praise of freedom, it is because the culture demands that the value of freedom is upheld. Just as in China, it is harmony which must be defended. What is salient in the world's philosophies also tends to be salient in their host cultures, and in that way at least, understanding philosophy is a window into culture. Philosophies are important for understanding not just peoples, but their histories. This is a view that became somewhat unfashionable in Western historiography, which has